Hello and welcome back. In this section, I'm going to talk about why food matters, particularly about why food matters in cities. To start with, the thing about food is that it's completely central to our everyday lives. Everyone eats, and everyone needs to get food from somewhere. And yet food has largely been off the urban agenda. When did you last hear a representative from your city talking proactively about the food system? When did you last hear somebody from your local government wanting to engage food systems in a way that wasn't just about clearing street traders or providing business support for new shopping malls? And when was the last time you looked at a textbook on urban studies or urban planning and saw anything about food? I'd hazard a guess that you're struggling to find an example. When we think about what the core concerns of urban government is, it's normally housing or basic infrastructure. It's never food. And yet food is central to our everyday lives, and it fundamentally shapes our cities. And so this MOOC argues that we need to think seriously about the interaction of food and cities, and what function food plays in all our lives. For example, many of the health challenges we're seeing emerging, like the triple burden of malnutrition in African cities, are because food hasn't been adequately on the agenda. We also need to think about food as a social practice and the role of food in social cohesion and individual and collective identity. And then we need to take a step further back and think about what food does for cities, what it does economically, environmentally, socially. So to do this, let me ask you, what have you eaten today? Seems like a mundane question, and one that's probably quite removed from your thinking about planning and about city governance. But indulge me, what have you eaten today? It seems like an inconsequential question, but it's probably one of the most important decisions that you take each and every day. What you eat shapes your physical and mental well-being. It connects or disconnects you from your culture, it connects or disconnects you from your family, and it shapes the health and development of your children. And so, what have you eaten today? This seemingly mundane question also then fundamentally shapes our cities, but I'll get back to that a little bit later. Anyway, the point is that cities and food are fundamentally related. While the way we eat is shaping our cities are also shaping the way we eat. And now, more than ever, in the context of rapid urbanization, rapidly changing food systems, and increasing global uncertainty, food needs to be seen as a central component to our urban lives that needs to be more present in urban planning and policy agendas. And so as we unpack the decisions we make about the food we eat, we begin to see how many of these are shaped by planning, policy and regulations that shape our food system and our cities. At the African Centre for Cities, we've been working on issues around urban food security for over 15 years. Our entry point was initially a food security lens, trying to understand what food insecurity looked like in cities, and then trying to think about what the planning and governance responses in urban areas might be. But we need to take a step back. Firstly, what actually is food security? The FAO definition is that all people at all times should have physical, social and economic access to sufficient safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. This definition has been premised on 4 fundamental dimensions. These are availability, is there enough food? Accessibility, can people get that food? Utilization, are people able to safely consume and get nutritional benefit from that food, and how stable are those 3 dimensions. And then in 2020, the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition added 2 additional dimensions, agency and sustainability, arguing that you can't have food security outside of a sustainable food system, and that people need agency. They need to have the ability to choose and the ability to change the food system. So that's the fundamentals. What we need to understand is that food security in urban areas isn't just a manifestation of food insecurity within the urban. It's actually formed by the urban. And this means that food insecurity in urban areas is in part shaped by the urban form and urban function. When we take this understanding, there's clear planning implications. And these are further shaped by urban economies, the kinds of livelihoods that are available, the kinds of employment opportunities, poverty dynamics, politics and policy, and social relationships that take place in cities. Now, as urban scholars or practitioners, you might not have thought that food security is important to your daily practice. But the reality is that our cities are fundamentally shaped by their food system. To quote Rain Roberts, more than with any other of our biological needs, the choices we make around food affect the shape, style, pulse, smell, look, feel, health, economy, street life, and infrastructure of our cities. So food matters because it shapes our cities and the life courses of their inhabitants. So we've seen that food insecurity and the governance of food systems is a crucial urban problem that hasn't been well acted upon by urban governance. But we shouldn't just see it as a problem. The food system is actually a potential point of leverage to achieve many of the SDGs and to achieve other development imperatives. In her launch of the FoodWorks program in New York City, Speaker Quinn said the following: "Suppose I told you that New York City had the opportunity to create thousands of new jobs, but we just weren't doing it. You'd probably be pretty upset. And now suppose I went on to say that we've actually had that opportunity for years, we just weren't paying close enough attention. I bet you'd have all kinds of choice words for me, the kind that shouldn't be repeated in polite company. All right, now suppose I told you that by taking steps to create those jobs, we could also improve public health and reduce our energy consumption. We could fight childhood obesity and asthma. We could keep millions of dollars in the local economy instead of sending those dollars across the country or around the world, but we still weren't doing it." Well, the fact is we've been ignoring those exact opportunities. For years, we've been missing a chance to create a greener, healthy, and more vibrant, economically vibrant economy. How? By ignoring the enormous potential of our city's food system. So the thing is, whenever we work with municipalities, they generally haven't thought that they've got the mandate to act. But if we look back in history, as we will do in other sections of this MOOC, we can clearly see that food systems today have been shaped by planning interventions of the past, and that those planning interventions have been done for particular reasons. For example, urban agriculture was historically quite marginalized in our cities, accompanied by restrictive zoning conditions about where urban agriculture could take place and what could be grown. Sometimes this was in the interests of public health, but often it was out of a sense that urban agriculture is a manifestation of informality, and that's an anathema to the modern city. There were also concerns that urban agriculture would undermine rural agriculture. Another example is the maize mills, the hammer mills in Zimbabwe. In Zim, it's only legal to mill in industrially zoned areas. And so this envisages a food system of large-scale industrial agriculture feeding large-scale millers. And yet most millers are these small micro-businesses that are rendered illegal. And so from these examples, we can see that the food system today often operates outside of legal frameworks. And this is in part the manifestation of the outcomes of restrictive attempts to control the colonial city. So the question is, what kind of planning might we want to have for today's cities? And if food was so central to previous planning, why isn't it seen as central today? So while local governments might not think they have any role, we can see that inaction in the planning environment doesn't just have neutral consequences, it often generates negative outcomes. So for example, when the state does insert itself into planning, it often gets it wrong. We often see the failure of modern market spaces that are being created in almost every city that we work in. Now, there are planning interventions taking place in most of our cities that are negatively impacting the local food system. For example, there's this rapid expansion into peri-urban agricultural land, and yet the decisions around this are often not food-based decisions. In the case of Cape Town, for example, there's been massive rezoning of peri-urban agricultural lands, and these planning decisions haven't historically considered the food impact. The concern in these decisions is about housing, or about industrial development, or about transport. Likewise, if we go to Kisumu in Kenya and you drive around the peri-urban areas, there's signs all over saying, this plot is not for sale, this plot is not for sale. And yet there's this constant development and encroachment. And yet the consequences on the food system are never really considered. And so to bring us back to the beginning of this section, our cities are shaped by food. As Caroline Steele says, in order to understand cities, we need to see them through food. And so in these cases where there's large development for housing, industries and transport, we must acknowledge that food systems and food security are also being shaped by these development decisions. And if we're thinking about planning and food, we actually need to think beyond the food system itself. People's ability to access and utilize food are shaped by things like access to energy, access to water, access to sanitation, transport design. So for example, the transport design that planners put in place shape the kinds of food flows we see in our cities. There's a need for both food-specific and food-sensitive planning approaches, and need to think about the food consequences of any planning decision. Now, the food challenges facing our cities are immense. But the food system also provides new and imaginative entry points for transitioning our cities into more sustainable, just, and equitable spaces for all. From the design of a house, to new plans for market spaces, to a major bulk infrastructure design, a food-sensitive approach can radically transform our future cities. If planning decisions that were taken in the 1930s continue to shape our cities today, then the plans we make now will set the development trajectories for our cities well into the future. Embedding sustainable, just food systems thinking in these planning processes will pay dividends for future generations. And so we have to start taking food seriously in the context of our cities, and planners have an integral role to play in that. Well, so where do you start? Well, one way is you start with developing an understanding of the food system and how it connects to the urban system. This course is an effort to render food more visible on urban agendas, taking seriously both the everyday lived practices and the policy and governance decisions made in urban design and planning.